With basil, or maybe you're just a really big basil fan and you're kind of looking to switch it up, well, this recipe is for you. I had a spare moment the other day and I was flipping through the channels on the TV, and the British Great Bake Off show was on, and they had this offhanded comment that was made about basil jelly, which immediately caught my attention because I've never even heard of such a thing, basil jelly. And my initial thought was, that kind of sounds gross. I mean, basil is more of a savory herb, it's got an intense flavor. Why would you make that into a jelly? But because I'm me and I'm always intrigued by things like that, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make it and we're just gonna see how it tastes. And holy guacamole, this might be one of the absolute best jelly recipes I have ever come across in my entire life. I did not think this was going to be good, and every single one of my family members absolutely loved it. I'm a big fan of your strawberry jams and jellies and raspberry and all that good stuff. But at this point, you're probably familiar with the fact that I also really love rose jelly. I've made it a couple of times on the channel and it's just exceptional. And this basil jelly is so good. I can't even put it into words for you. So if you have an abundance of basil, trying to figure out what to do with it, you absolutely have to try this recipe, because not only is it quick and easy and simple, it is absolutely outrageously delicious. I am going to be covering two different types of basil jelly. We're going to do a traditional basil jelly, and then we are also going to do one that has jalapenos in it, because a little bit of spice sometimes in a sweet jelly is exceptional. I will say that a lot of basil jellies, if you look them up online, call for adding vinegar, either white vinegar or apple cider vinegar, and I did not do that. I like my jellies to be sweet. The only time I will really add vinegar to a jellied or candied sort of thing is when we make cowboy candy with jalapenos. Other than that, I'm not really a big fan of adding even a splash of vinegar to my jams and jellies. I like them to be sweet. That's the goal there, so we're not going to be doing that. Another thing I want to note is a lot of recipes will call for just the leaves. It's most traditional that you're going to just use leaves when you're making things like pesto, or in this case, basil jelly. If you would like to stick to that, you are more than welcome to. As you can see from earlier footage, I went ahead and I used the stems, and even some that had bolted and started to flower, I cut those and I put them in there. And essentially the way we're going to start this off is by making a huge pot of basil tea. Now, tea by standard is essentially when you take hot water and you infuse it with the properties of herbs and spices. We are going to go ahead and strain this afterwards, so I'm not concerned with any bits being in there or anything like that. You can see one of our kittens right there. As most of you know, we are Maine Coon breeders as well, and I'm just absolutely in love with the kittens all the time. It's one of the best parts of the job. So you'll constantly see them running around all over the house. This right here is Dorian. He's a black smoke, and he's just as sweet as a button. And most of the time I'm going to have multiple kitchen projects going on, so you'll often see things being moved around or shifted in the background, or conversations being had, because this is a real family and a real kitchen, and there's a lot going on our little hobby farm. Now, in the description of this video, I will go ahead and put a standard recipe, which is going to call for about 2 cups of basil leaves, around 4 cups of water, and 5 cups of sugar, along with your pectin. That's kind of a normal size recipe. That's what you would typically do if you're not bulk cooking the way that I am. This is my water bath canner, and it's absolutely enormous. Because of that, it kind of gives away the fact that I'm going to be doing many jars of this basil jelly. I did have somebody order from our website the watermelon jelly that we have on there, and they made a comment about it, and they were like, hey, if you have some of that rose jelly or that basil jelly, feel free to put that in there. And I sent them a little handwritten note, and I was like, okay, just let me know how you like it though, so that way I kind of get a sense of whether or not I should put it on the website. And I haven't heard back yet, so I'm waiting on you. If you are watching this video, please let me know in the comments what you thought of that, because we just loved it. So here I am straining the liquid. You can see I'm getting all the bits out. I do this over a strainer and then with a cheesecloth on top of it to really make sure that we get all the little teeny tiny bits out of it. And it's essentially a huge giant pot of basil tea, which is really great for you to begin with. We use basil tea as a medicinal tea in our household. It's wonderful for coughs and illnesses, boosting your immune system. Basil has a slew of medicinal properties to it, so it's nice being able to use it as both a tea and jelly in this circumstance. Now, even though I have a giant water bath canner, I am not going to be making all of this jelly in my water bath canner. It's always very sticky and more difficult to clean up when you try to do things like that. So I'm going to be using a standard little pot here, and we're going to make multiple batches. And I'm going to be adding a couple of cups of liquid to this. So that's a 4-cup measurement right there. And since I'm using this twice, I'm looking at about 8 cups of liquid to work with. Now the standard recipe that I based this off of, because I didn't just come up with this on my own, I looked at a bunch of different recipes and then kind of tweaked things to my personal preferences. But the standard recipe that I looked at, which again I will link below in the description, calls for 5 cups of sugar. And this is a 1/2 cup measurement. I can't actually fit an entire 1 cup measurement into this container, so it looks like we're just adding the world's largest amount of sugar to this. And we're not. We're adding what the recipe that we based this off of calls for, which is 5 cups of sugar. Now the recipe doesn't actually call for lemon juice, the one that I'm linking in the description, but I find that when you add a little bit of lemon juice, it kind of balances out all the flavors and helps with the pectin working quicker to its highest capability. So I did add to this, I think, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. That's optional. You don't have to add that in there. Once I had the sugar in there and the lemon juice and it started to simmer, I went ahead and I added my pectin in there. You're going to be looking at a standard package of fruit pectin. Here you can see me having everybody in the house taste test the jelly. Before it actually sets, I like to have everybody taste test it and make sure it's at a decent sweetness level, that everything tastes good. And I was so shocked at how good this basil jelly was. You can see it, I have like crazy eyes. I was so excited about how amazing it tasted, and everybody else was so impressed, because you think basil jelly, it's not a super common food. I've never heard of it. You know, I'm 35 years old now and I've literally never heard of basil jelly. And so I was just shocked at how amazing this was, and it just absolutely flabbergasted me. I do not have a recommended amount of jalapenos to give you. I would definitely adjust it based off of your preferences. I like there to be a decent punch of heat if I am adding hot peppers to a jelly. So for me, I might add, I'm trying to think of it based off of a standard recipe. For a 4 cup of water, 5 cups of sugar, I'd probably add 10 jalapenos. You might not like that much heat, so you might require less, or you might like more heat, in which case more power to you. But I would estimate maybe 10 for that, depending on how hot your jalapenos are, because they can vary in heat depending on, you know, how much water they've gotten and things like that, versus the ones that you get in the store. So you have variables that go into it. You just have to adjust it based off of your preferences. I had to spend a minute chopping these up. I did cut them into little rounds and then run them through the food processor, because I want these to be nice and finely diced, so that way they're not big chunks in my jelly. That would not be tasty at all. Some people may choose to de-seed their jalapenos. I don't mind the seeds being in our jelly, but you always have that option as well if you want to go ahead and do that. And here I'm just going to follow that same process. I'm going to take 8 cups of liquid, because I doubled a standard recipe. I'm going to put it in the pot, add my sugar in and my lemon juice, and then move this to the stove and bring it up to a simmer At that point, I'll add in the jalapenos, and I will also add in my pectin and let this cook together so it can set into a really nice jelly. I don't like my jellies to be overly jellied. I don't want to open a can of jelly and be looking at what you get when you buy canned cranberry jelly for Thanksgiving, and it's just this log that slides out of the cans. I don't want that. I want it to be almost textured like a jam. I like it to be just firm enough to solidify in the jar, but soft enough that it spreads easily when it comes out of the fridge or even straight out of the jar. So that's my preference. If you like a firmer jelly, you may need to add slightly more pectin to this. Again, be open to adjusting things based off of your preferences. I do recommend that when you're making jellies, you put a plate in the freezer and kind of let it hang out there while you begin the process of boiling your jelly. Once you think that it might be ready, take the plate out of the freezer, dip a spoon into your jelly and drop it onto that plate. If it hardens and sets rather quickly, you can trust that when you go ahead and you package it, it's gonna set. You're not gonna have to worry about it, because there is nothing quite like the pain of going through the process of making jelly and then having to turn around and see that it didn't actually set in your jars. Oh my goodness, it's so disheartening. So I had that happen once and I was like, there has to be a better way. And that is when I started putting a plate in the freezer. I highly recommend it. Now you can use any size jar that you like. I really like having a variety of smaller jars, teeny tiny ones, and slightly under the pint size jars. It's just easier for me that way. I feel like I can almost estimate that I can use one of those small jars if I'm making peanut butter and jelly for everybody in the house or things like that. So that's my preference, but again, you can can these in any size jar that you would prefer. Now I want you to notice this ring of foam that is on the jelly. It's very important that you scrape this off. This just happens when you combine pectin with jelly. It's something that's very common, but it does texturally affect your jelly when it sets. And so you do want to remove as much of that as possible, and it's not flavored very well, so you just want to remove all of that if you really are looking to have a really beautiful finished product. So here you can see our basil jalapeno watermelon jelly, and I'm basically going to follow the same process. I am going to skim the foam off of the top of this, and then I'm going to put this into my canning jars. Now you do ideally want to use warm canning jars. They can sometimes shatter if you take a very cold jar or even a chilled jar and you put very hot boiling liquid into it. So the way that I will do that typically is when my oven is off, I will either place the jars on a cookie sheet and put them in the oven and set the oven to 180 degrees and allow it to preheat with the jars in there. It pretty much never makes it to the time where it actually reaches 180 degrees. It is almost always before that. You just kind of leave them in there for 5 to 10 minutes depending on how fast your oven actually heats up. And then you have these warm jars that you can go ahead and put your hot liquid into. Another option that some people like to use is running them through the dishwasher and then pulling them out when they're warm and filling them. Or you can fill the sink with very hot water and leave the jars hanging out in there until you're ready to use them. So this is the water bath canner. It's been cleaned after our making a whole bunch of basil tea. And I'm going to start filling this with as many jars as possible. Luckily for me, with this being such a large water bath canner and me choosing to use smaller jars to can, I can actually do 2 rows at a time with the water bath canner. Now, some people like to use their water bath canner when it's already full of water and the water's already warm. I will take my warm jars and I will put them into my water bath canner, and then I will put warm water on top of that. So I'm not going to add cold water to these jars that are full of warm to hot liquid. I'm going to continue this by putting warm to hot liquid on top of that and then turning my stove on and bringing it up to a boil. Once this has started boiling, I will go ahead and run my water bath canner at a full boil for 10 minutes because I'm going to have a combination in here of 2-ounce jars and half-pint jars. It's recommended that for half-pint jars, you water bath can them for the same amount of time as a traditional pint, and I'm not going to try to take out the 2-ounce jars while I have half-pint jars in there. So for me, it's just going to be a standard 10 minutes across the board for this jelly. But I am also at sea level. We are literally 5 miles from the ocean at Myrtle Beach, so I'm right there. I pretty much have no elevation, and it is recommended for every 1,000 feet of elevation that you add an additional 10 minutes to your water bath canner, which was something that was surprising for me. I wasn't aware that that was the way that it was with water bath canners. I do know with pressure cooking, it's definitely that way. You add more weight to your pressure cooker when you are your pressure canner when you are canning things. But yeah, I guess it's the same way with doing water bath canning, that you're supposed to add an additional 10 minutes for every 1,000 feet of elevation. So just keep that in mind depending on where you're actually located.
sure it's supposed to be 102.
No, that's amazing. That's the regular basil.
So, basil jalapeno, take one. Mmm! That's good! That's the best jelly I've ever had. Excellent. You should definitely make it.
That makes me so happy. He said he likes it better than the roast jelly. It's a big deal in this
And
house.
if you like it with a little bit of spice, the jalapeno one is good too.
Okay.
Which this is what I'm eating.